We're not here this morning to debate the resurrection. It happened. God raised Jesus of Nazareth from the dead. The resurrection then is rightly the centerpiece of our Christian faith. We're also not here to explain the resurrection. You can't explain the resurrection. It is beyond our human comprehension. We're here rather to learn from the resurrection. We're not here to debate the resurrection. We're not here to explain the resurrection. We're here to learn from the resurrection. To discover how what happened 2,000 years ago makes a difference in your very real life right now and in my very real life right now. To discover how God raising Jesus of Nazareth from the dead affects your 21st century life and affects my 21st century life. So let me share with you this morning on this Easter Sunday 4 insights, 4 things we can learn from the resurrection of Jesus. First of all, the resurrection tells us that we all matter to God. It's interesting that the most notable character in each of the accounts of the resurrection is Mary Magdalene. In fact, the only prominent figure in each of the accounts in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is Mary Magdalene. Now you have to understand something about Mary Magdalene. Mary was a nobody. First of all, she was a woman in a Jewish society. That made her a second-class citizen. More importantly, she was a sick woman. You see, Mary Magdalene was the woman who had 7 demons whom Jesus healed. To be a woman in Jewish society made you a second-class citizen. To be a person with a serious illness made you a great sinner. Because in Judaism, sin was associated with disease, and disease was sin. The greater the illness, the greater the presumed sin. So here we have a woman who's nobody. She's a second-class citizen. More likely, she's an outcast. And then Jesus comes into her life. And He pays attention to her and to her need. And He heals her. And for the first time in her life, Mary Magdalene finds that she matters, that she has self-worth, that she can believe in herself, and that she matters to God. And then it happens. Just when Mary Magdalene is feeling good about herself, just when Mary Magdalene feels like she is somebody, Jesus is crucified. And once again, this woman finds her world crumbling around her. She had been lifted from the pits, and now she finds herself once again in the pits. But that's not the end of the story, is it? John has this remarkable scene that I read a few moments ago where Jesus appears to Mary. She thinks He's the gardener, and they converse for a while, and then He says to her, "Mary, Mary." And in that moment, she realizes that her Lord has come to her again. In that moment, in those spoken words, Jesus helped Mary Magdalene understand once again that she did matter, that she has worth because she matters to God. It's not how the world sees you, it's how God sees you. It's not how others define you, it's how God defines you. It's not who you have been or what you have been, it is that you matter to God. The resurrection tells every single one of us, whoever we are and whatever we are, that we matter to God. Secondly, the resurrection proclaims the truth of God's forgiveness. The other notable figure in the resurrection accounts, of course, is Simon Peter. And you know Simon Peter's story. Simon Peter's the one who, out of one breath, proclaimed in Matthew 16, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God," and yet who could in just a few short days say, "I don't know Him." "Aren't you one of His followers?" "Never saw Him before." "Aren't you one of Jesus' followers?" "Don't know the man." "Aren't you one of the ones, the 12? "Leave me alone. I don't know the man." How would you like to be the one who, when Jesus was hanging on the cross, had Him look into your eyes and you look into His eyes and know that the last thing you did related to Jesus was to deny Him, to betray Him? Can you imagine the guilt, the shame, the embarrassment? Matthew, Luke, and Mark tell us that that Peter was so upset by what he had done that he went out and, quote, wept bitterly. And then Mark has this scene when the angels come and talk to the women at the empty tomb, and they say to them, now go into Galilee and tell the disciples that Jesus is going before them and He will meet them there. And tell Peter. Be sure you tell Peter. The angels say to the women, go tell the disciples that Jesus has been risen. He's gone ahead of them. He'll meet them in Galilee. And oh, by the way, be sure you tell Peter. Jesus wants Peter to know that he can't wait to meet Him in Galilee. Jesus wants Peter to know that he can't wait to take his hand once again and embrace Him in love. Jesus wants Peter to know that he is forgiven in spite of his great betrayal. You know the name John Newton, don't you? John Newton is the author of the wonderful hymn, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. You know his story? You know the story that Amazing Grace was written after his conversion from being a slave trader? That John Newton's livelihood for a goodly portion of his life was to serve on slave ships? That he relished the opportunity to abuse those slaves? You can read his journals, and you can find that this man relished the opportunity to be on those slave ships as they took the African people to England and to Europe. And then he was converted. And he looked back on his horrible life, and he could write, Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretched slave trader like me. Near his death, John Newton said this, and these are powerful words. My memory is nearly gone, but I remember two things, that I am a great sinner and that Christ is a great Savior. The resurrection, and in particular Jesus, the angel's words, and tell Peter, tell us that God is a God of second chances, that the God of the resurrection is a God of new beginnings, that the God who raised Jesus of Nazareth from the dead wants you and me to hear as well that His grace and forgiveness is available to us. Thirdly, I would say this morning, the resurrection verifies hope amidst despair. I came across some years ago a resource titled Letters to Pilate. Supposedly, these are actual letters that Pilate, who was the Roman governor who sentenced Jesus to death, wrote to his friend Seneca. Now, we don't know if these are historically verifiable or not, but supposedly these are the letters of Pilate, the Roman governor, to his friend Seneca. In one of those letters, Pilate wrote this, I tried and condemned the prisoner Jesus. He was crucified at once along with some other prisoners who were awaiting execution. By this time, Seneca, my friend, Jesus is dead and buried. The trial was short, but in due form and order. I condemned him to death. I could, of course, do nothing else. After all, what does it matter? What does it matter? One Jew, more or less. According to Pilate, case closed, deed done. No more Jesus, no more revolution. The Jewish authorities have spoken. The Roman Empire has spoken. End of history at this moment for the man Jesus. If you had been looking in on the trial of Jesus and you had witnessed His crucifixion, you would have come away from that experience saying, man, evil's won again. Wrong has won out over right. Injustice has won out over injustice. Once again, the good die young. And then God raised Jesus of Nazareth from the dead. Do you understand what that means? God looked evil in the face and He said, you don't have the last word. God looked at injustice in the face and said, no, let me tell you something. You don't have the last word. I have the last word. God looked the Pilates of the world and the Roman empires of the world and the authorities that be and all those who would reign in evil in the face, and He said, I have the last word. For I have raised this Jesus from the dead. Listen to me, friends. Let there never be a moment in your life where you believe the pundits have the last word. Let there never be a moment in your life where you believe the dark headlines are the last word. Let there never be a moment in your life when you believe that the negative experiences or painful experiences of your life are the last word. Never believe for one single moment that the darkness of this world, which is ever so prevalent, has the last word. Pilate said, "Done." God said, "Not done, for I have the last word." And finally, I would say to you this morning, the resurrection affirms so profoundly that there is life after death. In the raising of Jesus of Nazareth from the dead, you and I are given the assurance that life does not end in death. There's a wonderful book by a pediatric oncologist named Diane Comp, and the book is titled "Window to Heaven: When Children See Life in Death." It's a moving book, a highly emotional book. It's the story that Diane Comp tells of how she moved from agnosticism to faith by experiencing the lives of dying children. She tells, for example, of Anna. Anna was 7, and Anna was dying of leukemia. And Anna battled it, tried the treatments, worked for a while, and then her little body could take it no longer. And Diane Comp writes about being in the room, in the hospital room, where Anna is lying lifeless on the bed, unable to speak, unable to connect with her parents, no form of communication, surrounded by her parents, some physicians and nurses, and Diane Comp. And Diane Comp writes that all of a sudden, this lifeless little girl raised up from her bed and said, the angels, they are so beautiful. Mommy, can you see them? Do you hear their singing? I have never heard, Mommy, such beautiful singing." And then laid down with a smile on her face and died. Or what she tells about Mary Beth. Mary Beth was a 6-year-old who also battled cancer. And she writes about Mary Beth. Mary Beth was 6 years old when she was diagnosed with cancer. After a brief period out of the hospital, her disease recurred. On one occasion, her mother confessed to being baffled by a dream that Mary Beth told her about. She asked me, meaning the mother asked Diane Comp, what I thought the dream meant. Mary Beth told her mother that Jesus came to her in a dream with one of her grandfathers, a grandfather that she had never met, but whose picture she had seen. Together, Jesus and her grandfather told her of her impending death and encouraged her not to be afraid. Mary Beth awoke with peace after that dream and reassurance that she soon would be with Jesus and with her grandfather. Mary Beth died at home on Christmas Eve, Diane Comp writes, in absolute peace. Let there be no question. Let there be no doubt. The resurrection and countless life experiences tell us life does not end in death. So we're not here to debate the fact. We're not here to explain what is inexplicable. We rather are here this morning on this Easter Sunday 2011 to learn from the resurrection. To remember Mary Magdalene and how Jesus said, "Mary, you matter." And so you matter to God, whoever you are. To remember the words to Peter, and please be sure Peter hears, that I forgive him, so you too can know God is ever willing to forgive. To remember that Pilate didn't have the last word. God had the last word. And to know beyond a shadow of a doubt there is life beyond this life. Thanks be to God.